Facebook and one post on Instagram about that. Be like, #MeToo. I was sexually abused or just abused or harassed or whatever whenever I was such and such age, and had some spiel after that. But yeah, so then there's all these. I think it kind of started with Weinstein, which is interesting. It was like Hugh Hefner died, and everyone was like, "Oh, he did so much for the world, and he was so great." And then Weinstein got like persecuted for yeah, and so it was like, it was the Hugh Hefners that helped create the Weinstein. So, but so then like all these other people start coming out. I was sexually harassed by this person, and in Hollywood, I'm just like, I'm not surprised, you know. I'm just thinking, so the things that you're doing in the movies basically happen to you in real life. I'm like, because I feel like in so many movies that stuff's encouraged and that way of thinking is encouraged, and then it happens to them in real life, you know, and they're coming out and saying that this happened. I'm not saying they deserved it, but I'm saying, what did you expect surrounding yourself with those types of people? And I saw someone tweet, some news person tweet yesterday, not about the kid that said he was sexually harassed by Spacey. Isn't a kid anymore. He's an adult now. He was like 14 at the time though. And the guy tweeted, the tweet that I saw was like, what are parents expecting when they send their children into Hollywood? Like, in this environment.
And why is a 14-year-old going to an adult
party?
Yeah. To where he's in someone's bedroom at
right.
in the morning work.
Right. Yeah. So to an extent, I'm like, oh, that's terrible. That should never happen to anyone. But then on the other side, I'm like, you're putting yourself around the people like that are most likely to do that, you know. It's encouraged in your movies. It's encouraged in your TV shows, you know, all this stuff. So, yeah, Sam was just saying on Sunday that like God is shaking that world. So, anyways, talking about.
I think it's cool to see the Word of God and see the shaking. Because I've been a part of that world.
Yeah.
And, I lived in LA, when I was 20 and, being groomed to be a soap opera actress, and then ended up in Milan, Italy, and that's where God was like, I remember audibly him saying, go home.
Oh, wow. Who knows what would have happened from that point if you didn't.
Thank God I had an open-ended ticket. Because I really believe everything was fixing to really just
get bad,
blow up.
Yeah.
And he told me, he said, go home. And he said it so, that pressure, the Holy Spirit pressure, just, it was so real that I was immediately like on the phone making my escape, really. And I was on a plane the next day.
Nice. That's good. That's good. You were so sure too. You're like, I'll stick around and see what happens.
I'm an observer, so I was like, I was watching.
Yeah.
Everything around me, and I'm like, I think I'm done.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Thank God, because now I hear this stuff, and I'm like, I know what I was protected from.
Yeah. Yeah. So because of man's basic sinful nature, he tends to follow his natural inclinations to fulfill the lust of his flesh. Man's lower nature, our sinful nature, our flesh, craves sensual fulfillment and satisfaction, and we yield to lust not knowing that it leads to our own destruction. The root of adultery, immorality, and perversion. Yeah. So some of and it's a slow fade sometimes. Sometimes, for some people, it's like all they've ever known. Sometimes it's a slow fade from, you're just making one little compromise and it leads to a bigger one. And then sometimes people just jump, like, I don't know, there's a trauma or something, or they just jump right into it. So, like the whole thing, good versus God, there's some things that's like, oh, that's okay. That's not necessarily bad. It's not going to really hurt anybody. It's kind of the slow fade. way of going things. So practical evidences in our lives of immorality is a conversation that's sensual, just joking and talking about it a lot. Reading and watching impure materials and media, impure actions toward the opposite sex, tendency toward fantasy and daydreaming. Like, not daydreaming in itself is a bad thing, but fantasy, and you know what I mean. Impure habits, suggestive comments, desire for sensual music. I'm actually like really sensitive to that, so I know my limits.
Right now, that's Despacito.
I don't even know that. Someone briefly mentioned what that was at camp, but I didn't know what they were talking about. I'm naive to a good amount of stuff when it comes to like pop culture, because I don't care about it. But no, like in regards to sensual music, there was a point in my life where I worked with somebody that really liked Lady Gaga, and so in the evenings when we would close together in the drive-thru at the bank, she would just put it in the CD player, because the people in the drive-thru can't hear what music we're listening to, so it doesn't matter that we're listening to or what we're listening to, because they can't hear it. And so she would always put that in, and I really liked her voice. I was like, man, her voice is so pretty. So I would just listen to it, and I realized that I would leave work, and my attitude would be very haughty, like, and like, I'm all of that, and, kind of, I don't know, just the influence of that music, I didn't desire it. I actually realized eventually that it was having a bad effect on me and my spirit, and we didn't listen to that anymore. Well, it got to a point where I was even listening to it outside of that, because I thought it was cool. But, and this was first or second year of college, so it wasn't that, I wasn't like super young. But yeah, so like, I'm not saying all that music is bad, but a ton of it, you might be aware of like how that's affecting you, what it's causing you to think about, and what attitude it's causing you to have. Just like reading and watching impure materials or media. This is like a practical thing. I have the IMDb app on my phone, and I often pretty much before I watch anything, almost, if it's new to me and I've never seen it before, I go on IMDb and search it and make sure, like, look at what's in it. Under the parental guidance section, it pretty much outlines for you anything dirty that could be in the TV show or the movie. And so I look at that anytime I go see something new. Like, Michael was wanting to go see that new Daddy's Home 2. And so he said something about it, and I immediately was like, IMDb, I want to see, because the first one I think was pretty inappropriate. So, and that's why we didn't end up watching it. Also, I heard it wasn't funny. So then I looked up the second one, and it doesn't look like there's any bad scenes in it. And so I was like, okay, I might be up for watching that. But so that's something that we've made a habit in our life, to look things up before we rent them. Basically, when I go to rent a movie, I have my phone out, like, ready to look up every movie that I walk past, because anything that even seems, it's like, oh, that seemed harmless, or the preview was good, could have anything in it. You're just like, oh, wow, and just spur of the moment, like, scene or something like that, and then, I don't know, I don't want to see that stuff. So it is avoidable if people care to avoid it. I have so many people that I know that it's like, oh, I went and saw that movie. It ended up being really dirty. I didn't know. I'm like, are you serious? It's so easy to figure that out nowadays. Just look it up online. Or, sometimes just the preview itself gives it away, that it was, like, terrible, like, in terms of impurity and stuff like that. And they're, like, shocked that it was dirty. And I'm like, yeah, that was pretty obvious, from everything that they showed. Yeah, so... I don't think there's any excuse for that. It's just, what is your limit on yourself? What is your guideline for yourself? And just what is your guideline in terms of the word and what you feel convicted by and what God is asking of you? Because with my online students, we talked about asks you to be held to a little bit higher standard than some people, you know? Sometimes what is okay for one person is not necessarily okay for another. I'm not saying like extreme, like, oh, it's okay for this person to watch a bunch of sex scenes in a movie, but not this person. That's just not good for anybody. But sometimes, like, God might ask you to not listen to any non-Christian music. You know, He might ask somebody to do that. Or what was another example? Oh, she said there was one student who said God had asked her not to drink any alcohol at all, ever. Not that alcohol is the devil, but that's just a standard He asked her to hold. So, okay, next column, sensual. Did any of you guys have any comments on any of that? Sorry.
Sam just talked about how, there's things that, like, that he's felt or believes, but, he can't say them out loud because of the standard that God has called him to be, as far as our shepherd. And,
kind of.
I like to see, I appreciate his transparency with that, because it's just, that to me, that's good leadership to be able to say, hey, I might believe this way, but I would never be able to say that out loud.
Yeah.
Because of the standard that I'm being held to, that God's calling me to.
Yeah.
What may be okay for everybody else to do might not be okay for, like you're saying.
Yeah.
For,
like to just say stuff straight out to people. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, like some of the conversations that he and Aaron will have. Some of their thinking is very aligned. But he has to be careful about how he, like lets that come out or portrays.
Right. And there's probably some things that you can't just say from the pulpit either. Maybe if you had a one-on-one conversation with somebody, but some stuff just isn't meant to be like thrown into a sermon. Which I've heard people do before. I've heard some pastors go on really political rants, and I'm like, I didn't really come here to hear this. You know what I mean? I'm like, this is weird. Even if I agree with you, it's kind of weird. Like, so kind of dwelling too long. I heard this one pastor like hated Obama's guts. It was like obvious. I'm like, he's still a person. It's just like, gosh, you're kind of going over the top here. So that was weird hearing a pastor do that. I almost was like, this is probably inappropriate. I kind of feel like this is obviously inappropriate. You should have stopped early on. So carnal curiosity to see things, that curiosity, and just like not reining it in. Because you and I like this quote a lot. I don't remember where I read it, but you can't always determine, you can't always decide what thoughts are going to come into your head, but you can decide how long that thought is going to stay there. And I really like that quote because you might have a thought that you're like, oh man, you're embarrassed about or whatever, or it was inappropriate. But whether or not you like let that thought take you down a road and entertain it is different than to like stop it right there. So that's what taking your thoughts captive is. So you decide whether or not that thought gets developed or whether or not it is snuffed out. Okay, Michael and I always made fun of this one whenever we were in class. Tendency to enjoy nighttime better than daytime. We were just like, that's kind of, we just made fun of it. It was always funny. Like, the nighttime is evil. But there is something to what happens in the nighttime compared to the daytime because it's just, I don't know, people like, it's so weird. Like in nighttime hours, it's like they think if things are more acceptable and you can get away with more, and it's like we're tired and we're alone and it's just, I don't know. It's stuff that isn't okay in the daylight seems like okay not in the daylight. And I think there is a spiritual aspect to that. I'm not saying everything that happens at night is terrible or that the nighttime itself is bad. But there is a certain amount of truth to darkness and stuff that happens in the dark, and people think it's hidden. And just, I don't know, the overall feelings that come with it. I don't know. There's something that comes with like the morning or just daytime that things are, you think even more clearly. You know, I feel like at night it's so easy for us to have a clouded judgment or just get dwelling